end, I think. But I still see your screen.
Well, we got the impression of you, so I think that is fine enough.
Okay. I don't see the presentation yet, though.
Okay. Perhaps just to get it started, and then I just want to give you a go because the slides change automatically. Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I can be, as soon as I see the presentation. There we go. Okay, I'll just go. Hi, I'm Ben Sawyer, and I am from Digital Mill. It's a consulting firm in Maine, and we actually started and run the Games for Health project, which looks at all uses of video games, video game technologies for health and healthcare. And really the promise here is to look at issues around how games engage and motivate, how they support change and decisions, and how they can create objects that scale and sustain opportunities for health interventions around the world. So ultimately, it's about helping to make better choices. Here's a bunch of games. These are all games for health, and all of them are really interestingly done. The purpose of this slide isn't to show you any specific game. It's to show you that there's a cadre of games in this space that look like the kinds of games you expect to see. They're well produced. Now, some of these games have actually gone through clinical trials like Remission. Remission had a triple-site, double-blind study for its game for engaging cancer patients and showed that it was effective at raising their self-efficacy and their levels of chemo in their bloodstream. So it definitely changed behavior. Now the issue is, what is a game? Now we have definitions of games like we pull out of dictionaries or get from academics, and then we have historical perspectives of what games are, like checkers. But really, games are a perception. It's something that comes out of our love of video games over the last 30 years. So you have to balance that game perception versus actual. Now we have this term called gamification, which was originally about using attributes of games, but is not about actual games and has devolved to being about points and badges. So we have to understand that gamification has pros and cons. The biggest con, I would say, not on this list, is the fact that we don't really have a good held definition of it, and people expect more from it than what it is. But it is easy to implement, it's clear to the user, so it's gained some foothold. But when you really look at what gamification has been in healthcare, it really has been about gamified steps. It's like biosensor input with sort of basic competitions, things like Virgin Health Miles, Shape Up, and where they basically have points to see who can walk the furthest, the fastest, the bestest. When you think about gamification, you should really think about this idea of everything's on a gamut now. We have apps that track our health, and then we have games like Remission, which I talked about, which are more like the games your kids or game players would expect to see. And so we have this gamut in between, and really we're going to fill all of it. Now the question is, why do we use games? Well, a lot of people think it's about motivation, but BJ Fogg shows that motivation in and of itself isn't necessarily a good solution. What I would tell you is that games are about a whole new form of information architecture that we can employ that goes beyond motivation. But what have I seen? I've seen large sales with low health impact, like We Fit. I've seen high health impact in the case of Remission, but for a narrow target audience. And I've seen a lot of bad games with bad targets. Catching fruit and not pizza isn't necessarily a great health game. And so what we've been doing is trying to dedicate ourselves to seeing the best practices come out and seeing better things done. The slide's not advancing, so okay. So what we've been looking at is this notion of positive health, this idea that Dr. Martin Seligman and others talk about, where we go beyond, where we take somebody who's at some sort of normal state of health and we actually increase their health capacity, such that when they meet a health adversity, they regress back to the mean, not drop below it and end up in illness or end up in a long, prolonged recovery. So we've looked at a whole series of games that we think are not disease-based, that have multiple health issues that they can affect, that allow you to be healthy immediately or after playing, that have population health effects, and that really address this idea. And so the Games for Health project actually for the last couple of years has been talking about 16, 17 different areas where we can invest in. And these are games that people can play irregardless of their underlying health condition, and that they are better off for playing it, whether they're sick or not sick. We make them healthier regardless of where we pick them up. These might be games like our Play Forward project. This is a game for kids who are hitting adolescence, where we teach them how to negotiate risky situations that could lead to unhealthy behaviors around drugs, alcohol, and sexual risk-taking. Or our Mealy walking game engine that really looks about how we can make walking games, real games, not gamified steps, where we can reward everybody for walking, because walking is really the best, most available baseline exercise for everybody in the world, rather than these high-tech fitness games that only appeal to fitness freaks. So let's think about the forms. Games can change behavior. They can instantiate behaviors like a jogging game or a walking game. They could reward work with other behaviors, and they could be entertaining. Now, what you see on the screen right now is a model for Play Forward, that game on, that I talked about earlier. And what this shows you is that we can actually build and imbue in these games complex behavioral models and theories of behavior change into our software. So what are the opportunities for you? Simple games that cover key skills and knowledge to drive understanding capacities, larger games that could generate certifiable skills, and games that contribute to larger public health issues and baseline health. I think that these show you, and what I've tried to do in a very, very short amount of time, is to give you a little bit of enthusiasm that games have an opportunity here that is both wide and deep. And if you just follow in one little corner of something, you'll miss the strategic opportunity. Well, I definitely got my exercise this morning now. I've never done an Ignite over a delayed Google Hangout, so I'll put that badge on myself. This is great. Well, hopefully that was helpful.
Okay, thank you, Ben. How well can you hear us over this microphone? I've got a microphone on a Bluetooth speaker, so if it doesn't...
I can hear you enough to reply.
Okay, all right. So first of all, thank you. One of the points to be made is to just dispense with all of the formalities of the intros and the round-table introductions and so on and so forth. And really focus first on transmitting some information that will be food for thought, along with the sandwiches that we're having here in Geneva. I do want to say hi to the few people I can see that are online joining us, and we have 10 minutes now for questions. So you a lot of the information pretty fast might be just a way to. I don't know if you want to try to venture and try to turn your hotel Wi-Fi video feed back on, but if you don't, that's okay too. And if for anybody listening in remotely, you can ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button that's in the left hand of the video window, and then there's a script that appears on the right. So
let me see. I'm looking for. I see the chat. I see chat here. Is that what you're talking about?
Only you and I have access to the chat, but there is a Q&A feature.
Oh, there's a Q&A. Sorry, Q&A. I see it.
I don't see
okay.
There yet.
I'm now in Q&A. This user is not running draw. I don't know what that means. Okay. Question. Ask your audience to submit questions.
Right. First question then. I mean, obviously, it's most likely everybody's blind. I mean, they have to show symbols like B, fitness, and so on and so on. So I'm getting almost high tech in the complicated process of this. What is a high tech and what are we talking about?
I think I heard something about that there's a complicated process of building these games, and what more can I say about that? I'm not hearing the question as well.
The price tag, yeah, so that is the price tag question. How expensive are these games?
How expensive? Okay. So listen, the bottom line is that some of the games that I talked to you about were definitely in the $500,000 to $1 million range to build, but other things that we've built have been well under $50,000. I mean, the basic opportunity here is to put together problems and areas and ways that you're thinking about addressing those problems, and then work with designers and give them some sort of scoping. Say, is there something meaningful that we can do at this price range? And if so, what does that look like? The Mealy game engine, which we've been working on for a while, has about a $50,000 investment, and it's already has wonderful opportunities when put into the hands of the right people. We've done other things. At even lower price points. It really depends on what you're trying to do. Certainly, you can't do Play Forward, which has 12 hours of gameplay, has 5 different games embedded within it, has 12 different storylines that the player can go through. That's not a $15,000 game. But we've done very simple things like explaining how viruses work, like how it works through a community. In a much more affordable format. It really is about scoping a particular idea and then having it and then having an honest discussion about how that budget matches up with the opportunity.
And just to give you a feel for the room, questions, comments about either the concept of the test.
I think I saw really briefly a game that helps cancer patients to kind of attack their own cancer. I don't know if I saw that correctly.
That's remission. That's the remission project. Yes.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about that, because that seems really interesting, and perhaps the kind of psychological effects of, blasting away your own cancer on the screen, and that really does help psychologically the body to battle with that.
I mean, so they definitely raised their self-efficacy scores in that game, so that would be some indication. There's some interesting elements, right? Like when we look at behavior change theories and other types of things that run from the very tactical sort of approaches to the skill sort of approaches. I mean, there's a whole other cadre of people who've been looking at the sort of elements where games bring out emotional reactions. And certainly this notion that you're inside the body and you're attacking cancer cells and you're being victorious over them creates that sort of emotional framework that may actually contribute to some of this. And there may be other opportunities where a highly emotional sort of style of play and narrative does help with that. My experience has been so far is that we need all of these different pieces, and that as a designer, you're thinking both about like, okay, how do I teach a very definable skill that we know leads to behavior change? How do I deal with knowledge pieces that we know maybe doesn't lead but are needed to be present? And then how do I bring emotional elements as well as, personal calls to action within that product? So, much as you saw in that model, however brief for 15 seconds, the opportunity here is to make sure that we're creating these cauldrons, these combinations of all of these techniques, and doing them to the best of our ability that time, budget, and talent will allow us.
Okay, thanks, Beth. We've actually got 2 minutes left, so maybe time for one last question. We do have Aaron who's viewing online. We just asked if we could repeat the question, but I think I hope we have the first question about cost and the second question about remission for getting around the cancer.
Question. Yeah, okay. I have a question. If you can bring the experience, how did this approach or if it ever worked with the chemical medicine?
Can you repeat that?
Quality, I don't know. So how the methodology is being used by the clinical medicine or in the case of oncology, how it's accepted, how you see the future of the link.
Okay. So the question is about whether serious games for health have been used in clinical
Game which is very funny title, very attractive. Quality is that is not very funny. Very attractive. And also some other conditions. So how it was used anywhere.
Can you type it into the chat, Rita?
Yeah. Well, while you type, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so you're referring to behavior change theories, which is great. It would be interesting to have some references on what theories, the behavior change theories you think are the most adapted to your type of thinking. So like the mission or behavior change gaming, what is the behavior change theory that you're referring to? And
Sure. So like which ones are we using, or which ones do we think work within games? I mean, let me just say that's a complex question. There's a variety of ones, and when we work with people who spend their life, working on these things, we try to build these like sort of manuals where they put down the theories that they're trying to do, and we build them and we connect them to the sorts of things that you want to do in games. I mean, personally, I really think that outside of things where we're teaching various specific skills that may be deficits to someone who's trying to change behavior, say cooking better, we can teach them how to cook better. I think the bigger thing is the one that we found is very interesting is sort of social learning theory, where we can embed within the game either other players or non-player characters that enable the person to really see the differences and experience interacting with the differences for people, whether they've chosen good outcomes or bad outcomes, where they can really understand where something moves longitudinally for them within the game, either by observing what other characters have happened to them or their own character as they're playing themselves. But I've seen all kinds of different theories applied, and it really, shows that the versatility, or at least the opportunity for versatility within games, is pretty high. You see, do you have examples of how serious games have been used in clinical medicine, especially oncology, where patients are facing diseases that are not fun or game-like? Well, clearly they were using it within remission. I think this does go to the larger point that, depending on, I'm much more bullish on games being preventative and having their best abilities to shine as preventative opportunities than as therapeutic within certain disease states. I think where they can be most therapeutic is in like sort of sensory motor rehab, where people are really dealing with physical issues that they're trying to put these people in environments that for rehab that are really, really boring and awful. And games can, I think, really work well there, and we see a lot of evidence of that so far. I think when somebody is dealing with a disease like diabetes and others, despite the work that's been done, I'm not necessarily sure that disease management style games work great there. Where it may work great in some of those settings is where games might help with skill deficits that people who have those diseases are facing. So the game that helps you to take your pill every day, I'm not so sure about that one, even though people are trying on it. But the game that shows a heart patient how to cook with the right ingredients so that they can really start to change their underlying behaviors that are contributing or exacerbating a particular disease state, I think that holds more promise, which is why we've been looking at those preventative type games, because remember, if we teach someone to eat better regardless of their underlying health condition, we're probably helping that heart patient as well as the person who is not yet a heart disease patient. So I think that when I think not only with the work that we're trying to do, but the work and the representation that you bring to this, I really think it's more working at that baseline where those baselines also contribute to those disease states. And the one thing that I didn't say in my presentation that is really interesting to me about this organization is that you have the ability to not only deploy games, but to deploy mentors and experts who can use the games in working in conjunction with people. And the idea that games should just exist by themselves and be these objects that float around the internet and do good, that's nice and that's very science fiction and awesome. But I really think it's the combination of humans and games with others that really is where the sweet spot is going to be. And so organizations like IFRC, I think, have the opportunity to be at the cutting edge of that sort of combination effect, that transmedia effect where games are a very big part of that to happen. So I'll leave you with that.
All right. On that thought, then, thank you very much. It is meant to be frustrating and hopefully will lead to, potentially lead to more direct one-on-one conversations. So thank you. And it looks like we know you're in a hotel room, so hopefully you're about getting sleep. We can talk throughout your night.
Yeah, no problem. It was great. Thank you. I hope it was helpful in some way, and I'm happy to follow up.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
I think
Bye.
I did.